Hi there, fabric jugglers. It's Babs here from MyFieryPhoenix, and today is day 3 of the 5 skirts in 5 days challenge. And today we're going to be making ourselves a lovely little ruffle skirt. I'm not sure if you can see the ruffles quite from there, but we've got some nice little ruffles in there. And if we work our magic properly, we've actually got beautifully aligned matching seams on the reverse. So oh, she flings her hair back. We're going to be working on this skirt today. So grab your bits and bobs and your elastic, and I'll see you in a minute. I'm not going to be taking you through every single piece of this process. I'm going to be taking you through each new technique. So if you've been following along with our previous tutorials, you will, it's probably easier to see on the reverse, you will be cutting your fabric and hemming those raw edges. We're also going to be pressing and pinning a double hem and then top stitching that double hem together. So it's literally, you fold it 1/4 of an inch, press it, fold it 1/4 of an inch, press again. So if I show you on the waistband, it would be let's get that in shot. It would be the 1/4 inch fold and then another 1/4 inch fold, which is then pinned in place. So just to show you that one more time, it is 1/4 inch in and press, and then again another 1/4 inch in and press, and that then becomes the hem. So if we have a look at this one, I have already sewn that hem, and it is literally everything nicely and neatly in place, and it's simply a top stitch run down the edge of the top of that double fold. That shouldn't cause you any issues by the time you've got to this point in the process. And what I'm going to show you next is how to create a ruffle, and we're going to be using some tooth floss because it's nice and strong, and it's slippy, so it will slide through the stitches quite nicely, and it will slide through the machine without gumming anything up. And what we're going to do is we're going to be, if I can get this in shot, there we go, we're going to be zigzagging over the top of that floss so that when we then pull, it gathers really easily. So you need to set your stitch length to about 2.5 and the widest zigzag that you have. Pull out a lot of spare floss so that you don't have to worry about anything getting caught up, and pull the floss all the way through to the back. We're going to line up the fabric underneath the floss, and hopefully you'll be able to see that nice and clearly against the green. And we want to be working as close to this edge as possible, and we need to try and line up, and this is why it all starts to look a little bit tricky. We need to try and line up the floss with the gap in your sewing machine, with the gap in your presser foot, and that way it will be held in place as we sew. So you can give that a little bit of a tug around so that it lines up. And if you're lucky, you'll be getting a nice burst of minty freshness all the way through this particular process. And then just slide it all forward so that you're lined up. You've got your floss coming out the back, and you've got your fabric sitting where it needs to be. And try to avoid what I've just done, which is lifting the presser foot up at the last moment, because then the floss will just ping off. So now you can actually start to do your zigzag, and you don't need to do anything majorly complex. It is just a simple, straightforward zigzag. Try and hold the floss out of the way. You want it to be running through the centre of the presser foot so that you're not stitching the floss in place, and try and keep as close to the edge as you can. And by the time you've finished, you should then have your floss neatly underneath your zigzags, which means that when you hold the end, you can then ruffle along the length of fabric, which will give you your nice controlled ruffles. So once that is done, I'll just pull that through, trim away your loose ends, and we are then going to attach it to our I can't remember what I called them, but our joining pieces. Connectors, there you go. Once you've got your ruffle in place, you can then start to join it to your connector. So I'll just move the sewing machine back out of the way a smidge, trim off some of my loose ends. Don't trim away your floss yet, because you will need it to adjust the length and position of your ruffles as you go. Now, the very first time that you attach your bottom ruffle to your first connector piece, you need to place them right sides together, and you're going to sew beneath the layer of the ruffle zigzag. So you just keep those pinned in place and use lots of pins. I'll show you that in a moment. And once you've got that in place, you can then take out your your floss. So we don't want that anymore, so we can get rid of that, which means you don't have minty freshness in your skirt forevermore. Then you can flip that ruffle down, and you have your first connector piece, which is the green fabric here, and your first ruffle, or your bottom ruffle, already attached. So now we're going to move on to the sandwich, which is slightly more difficult than just attaching that first piece. And we're going to, first of all, we're going to find our second connector piece. I'm alternating colours, which is why it looks rather strange with my reds and my greens, but it should hopefully work. And what we're going to do is, first of all, line up on this top connector. We're going to line it up and get the length correct. So we'll pin the edges together, because the edges really should not be moving. No matter what else happens with the ruffles in between, the edges should meet. So you shouldn't end up with something that looks like this or something that looks like that, with it all hanging off the edge. It should all line up very neatly. So they're the first two pins that I personally pop in. Not too fussed about where the centre is. Maybe I should be. Some of you will be quite stressed about that. And then I just pull it so that they are the same length. And then I adjust my ruffles up and down the length of that piece so that I get the effect that I want. So I'm going to stop talking now and probably put this on high speed, and then you can see me adjusting those ruffles. And this is where we're going to end up with one layer of ruffles on the bottom. We will then have our second layer of ruffles, and then the connector. So it's very important that the sandwich is created so that you have right sides facing between the connector, the new connector, and the ruffle. And then you have the right side placed down on top of the new ruffle. Now, you may wish to adjust things slightly. If I turn it up this way, you may want to adjust things slightly. I've got green on green, so that if there is a slight discrepancy between length, it's not going to be screamingly obvious. However, I would prefer that my ruffles covered the connector, so I'm just going to make sure when I create my sandwich to position this. It is slightly down, but that's not a problem. And I'm just going to repin in place. Now that I have everything pinned together in what looks very messy, because I've got one layer that is pinned horizontally and one layer that is pinned vertically, I now have my skirt which covers, or my ruffles which cover the connector beneath, and I've got my new connector attached on top. So this is sort of what it should look like. You may be able to make it look neater than that, and if you prefer, you can simply sew a row of tacking stitches on your ruffle to the first connector before you put the sandwich together. That's personal preference, and entirely up to you as you see fit. And what we're going to do is now sew 1/2 inch below the top of the red border. That way we will definitely capture the the zigzags that we've used for the ruffling, and we shouldn't worry about where we are on the very back green panel. That's not what's important. It's the join at the front between the green and the red that is the important join, so we need to be going 1/2 inch below that join. And here we go. Remember, you can sew over the vertical pins, or rather the horizontal pins, but you can't sew over pins that are at a strange angle. So you'll need to remove the pins as you go through the work. You have to lift the presser foot. Make sure you keep your needle down. Can't get to that particular pin. Come on out. There we go. And then continue on. This is where we find out whether it's all been worthwhile and if we've managed to do this correctly. And we flip up and we now have a new connector. We have our new ruffle attached and our connector from underneath. And yes, it all looks like it's hanging together quite nicely. And then you just repeat that process again for the top ruffle. So you would attach it, align it, and what I would suggest you do in this instance is top stitch it in place first, because the next piece that we add will not just be a bog standard connector, but will be the waistband. So top stitch this one in place at the heights that you want, so that it covers over this join here, and then I'll see you back in a moment to attach the waistband. Now that this is top stitched in place, I can remove my first batch of pins, and also I can take out the tooth floss so that my skirt will not constantly be minty fresh. And just pull that through. All being well, you haven't oversewn the tooth floss anywhere, which means we now have our ruffles attached to the body of our skirt, and we just need to attach the waistband, which we've pressed with our 1/4 inch as before for our skirts, and I have pressed in half so that when we come to turn and do the edges, we know where we're turning. And we're going to be attaching from back to the front. Now it may be worth clipping the additional fabric off, so I shall just trim that excess fabric away, being very, very careful not to cut through the ruffle that we've just attached, because that would be very silly. And now we're going to attach from the back, now that everything is the right length. So we've got our strange looking ruffles. Oh, I've still got a pin in there from earlier. And we've actually got quite a bit of excess fabric here, which we can trim away. Whilst we're in the trimming away kind of mode, I'll trim away the excess here as well, so we don't have too much. Which means I will be losing that zigzagging. However, we can re-zigzag to keep those edges nice and neat. So I'll just trim those away. It's not cut straight through. There we go. I'll put the excess. So the first thing we'll do then is just tidy up that loose edge. So we'll just zigzag through that. now we're going to attach our waistband. As we have with all of our other skirts, we're going to attach it with the right side of the waistband to the wrong side of the fabric. Just pin that in place and it should be the correct length. So it should be a nice easy one. In fact, we probably don't even need to pin it in place. We could just sew along, but that's dangerous talk there from me. And everything should tally up. It's the correct length because it was measured that way to begin with, which is perfect. And then I'll just pop one more in the middle and sew that along. Make sure you keep your ruffles out of the way as you sew. Take out our pins. And we're ready to now fold our waistband over. Now this is all starting to look very much like a real skirt. I'm a real boy, as Pinocchio said. This is now starting to look very much like a real skirt. So I shall just fold that over and pin it in place. And again, as before, we want to make sure that we've got all of this ugly black stitching covered over. And I've done it in black stitching to make it easy for you, hopefully, to see on the video. Not actually my personal colour of choice. I would rather have something that blended in more with the skirt, but that won't help you when you're learning if you can't see any of my stitches or sewing lines. So I'll just get this pinned in place and top stitched down. You don't need to see me doing that. You've seen that plenty of times in the previous two videos. And then I will come back to show you what we do with our elastic. So now that we've got our waistband sewn in place, we're going to thread through our elastic. Now, our elastic is cut to 7 inches, which is significantly shorter than the waistband, but it will stretch to the size that we need. And we obviously want it not to be the size of the doll's hips, but the size of the doll's waist, which will be smaller than the size that we've got created. So what I'm going to do is I'm taking my huge wool-eyed needle, which will fit this particular elastic quite nicely, and I'm going to thread that through. Now, if you don't have a wool needle, then by all means use whatever you have to hand, whether that be a safety pin, or a paper clip that you're going to fasten around in some strange way, then that's up to you. It's where your ingenuity can come to the fore. Well, what you need to be very careful of is that as you're tugging this all through, you don't put it so far that the end disappears. So we need to make sure that this is aligned, and we're going to pin this in place so that it doesn't disappear off anywhere. So we've just got that slightly sticking out. Before we put any tension on it whatsoever, we're just going to pin it in place, and I tend to pin through several times just to make sure that it really is going to stay where I want it to stay. So that pin goes through quite a few times. And now I can put it through, and you really need to make sure that it's not twisted when we finished pulling it out the other side. So let's just pull all that through. Ruffles upon ruffles upon ruffles, folds of fabric. You'd think this was enormous rather than being a doll's size version. Right, and now we need to make sure that this elastic is not twisted. And I thought it was twisted for a minute. Is it? And the only way you can tell is by pulling it out. And you have to literally just feel your way along to check that it's not. And that's not twisted, which is excellent. So again, I'm going to pin this end in multiple times because we are about to do our last seam. And actually, yes, I'm going to pin it as close to the edge as possible because we're going to do our last seam, which will be further in than this pin. So we've now got our skirt with its elasticated waist. You can feel that that is not twisted, or if it is twisted, you need to untwist it. And we're now going to flip this around, and we're going to join one last seam down the side, and this time around we need to make sure that everything is as aligned as we can make it. So all of our seams need, whoops, throwing pins at myself, all of our seams need to line up. So whilst it's probably best not to try and pin through that huge chunk of fabric, you want to make sure that the ruffles align. So we'll pin those together, and then we're just going to check that the next ruffle is aligned, and then come down to the next seam, which should be aligned. Now you can alternate the direction of the seams by pushing one way and one the other way. So 1 point's down, 1 point's up. That reduces bulk. So you can do that if you wish. If you don't feel any desperate need to do that right now, then don't. It's an added layer of stress, then don't worry about it. And then we just make sure that the last two ruffles are joined together. And then we simply sew down the lot. And there will be some serious bulk in this section, but just work your way through it slowly and take out the pins as you go so that you don't stab yourself. So we'll just get that sewn in. And then you'll find that you have a completed skirt. So whilst it looks rather impressive, it looks rather complicated. In actual fact, it's not too terrible to do, and it gives you a lot of leeway. It's a very forgiving design. So pick your width, whether that's 1/2 inch or 3/4. 1/2 inch should be the most that you're sewing in by. And then let's just get going. And you will need to do a back tack at the bottom and at the top, because there will be nothing else to secure everything in place. Now I've got some pins that are going up and down, so I just need to be very careful of those and make sure that I'm sewing on the inside of those pins. I'm just going to re-pin this closer to the edge so I can sew next to it rather than remove the pin. And now we're getting a little bit bulky, so it may struggle, so I might have to hand crank and pull through as we go. There we go, just to give it a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of TLC. And then we'll back tack. One last time forwards. And we're through with our sewing. And it looks like I've just finished my bobbin thread at the same time, which is perfect timing, because it would have been really awkward if I'd lost my bobbin in the middle of that. So let's just take all these pins out, hopefully without stabbing myself. There we go. Cut down those threads. Now we can flip our skirt round, and we should have a very nice little ruffle skirt. So I shall go pop this on my doll, and we'll see how it's turned out. And so here we have our ruffle skirt on our little model, and as you can see, it's managed to fit very nicely. We've got an elasticated waistband here, and the seams at the back have all worked their magic and joined in very nicely with the alignment of the colours as we go down. So it's well worth pinning those in place at the end. So hopefully you're still enjoying your 5 skirts in 5 days challenge. Remember to share your finished pictures with the hashtag 5skirts5days so that you're in with a chance of winning our lovely goodies at the end. And I'll see you tomorrow for our next mystery skirt. Bye for now.